Alrighty then, we are doing a different kind of reaction content today because I am still kind of trying to figure out what I want to do with this channel. So, today we're going to be reacting to a video series I have actually seen before. However, to be clear, this video came out, and this is a video series, so we're going to do the first part today. And then the plan is that we're going to go through all, I believe it's 6 parts? Yes, it's 6 parts. Now, this came out for the first time 9 years ago, and I have seen it twice since then. I saw it not long after it came out, like within the first month or two, and then first couple of months, because I think the sixth part had not yet released when I watched it the first time. So it was I was a little, a little ahead of the game right before the last part of the series dropped. And then I watched the last part of the series like a week later when it dropped or whatever. And I have not. I saw this again in college about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, yeah. So I have not seen this in 6 years. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember that this was a very, very good one from them. And in case you're wondering who the them is I'm talking about, today we're reacting to Extra History. Because I am a total history nerd, in case you didn't know. So we're going to be reacting to Extra History Europe, the First Crusade. And today's part is going to be the People's Crusade, Part 1. With their titling system, the Part 1 or Part 2 comes after the episode title. So the episode 2 title is Peter the Hermit, and the episode 1 title that we're looking at today is the People's Crusade. But yeah, we're gonna get right into it. I think this is gonna be fun. Definitely gonna be a change of pace from the comedy stuff we've been watching so far on this channel. And we're gonna see how it goes. And if you like it, let me know in the comments, because I will definitely do more like this if you guys like this, because this is definitely something I can talk about for hours without getting bored. So
the year is 1095 CE. We stand at the Council of Clermont. In the audience are all the great names of Europe, secular and ecclesiastic. For a moment, there's a hush. The last words of Pope Urban II's fiery speech extolling nations of Christendom to retake the Holy Land from Muslim invaders hangs in the air. Then someone in the crowd shouts, Deus.
If I remember correctly, I don't remember what Deus Vult means, unfortunately. If I remember correctly, though, and I probably learned it from this video, that or some other source. If I remember correctly, at this point in time, the Muslims had been in the Holy Land for like a few hundred years. So it's not so much of a retaking as it is just a straight up invasion, because I don't think it had happened anytime recently. I think the Muslims were well and settled in Jerusalem by the time this happened. I want to say something like 400 years, but I could be a little off.
Deus Vult. God wills it. The chant is picked up by man after man until the council rings with deafening shouts of Deus Vult. Then, out of the crowd, a bishop named Ademar rushes up and falls to his knees before the Pope, proclaiming that he will lead any willing Christian to reclaim the Holy Land for Christ. And thus, the First Crusade began.
You know he was just trying to make a name for himself and had no idea what he was getting into. The absolute show that he was about to get himself involved in. Because if he had known, oh man, I don't think he'd have done that. Maybe he really was just that devout and was willing to put up with whatever. But man, it would take a lot of willpower to have someone know what was about to happen and go on with it anyway. Because the thing about the First Crusade, the thing about most of the Crusades, is it's never one army. It's always multiple armies. So there's stuff that happens in the First Crusade that they couldn't have possibly accounted for. And they're going to go over some of that in this episode. But there's also just a lot of problems that were totally foreseeable. Like the different armies not getting along and having different policies on the whole thing, the whole, crusade itself. Having different ways they wanted to do it, different goals they wanted to achieve. they had very different ideas of what they wanted to do going into this, and that much should have been foreseeable. Um, Supply problems should have been foreseeable with given how many people they were trying to move all at once. There's a lot of stuff that would have been foreseeable, but there's also, as you're about to find out, a lot of stuff that no one could have ever guessed was going to happen. The first crusade, there's a reason. I think they do touch on the third crusade during a different video series, but there's a reason the first crusade is the one they decided to make the video on first, and they haven't really touched on the others too much, because the first crusade, I'll shut up and let them tell you, because it's insane.
There's just a few problems. You see, by this point, Muslims had actually occupied the Holy Land for nearly 400 years, and there—
Oh, wow! I was right on the money. I was like, it was somewhere between 300 and 600. No, it was 400, give or take. Haha. As you can see, this channel has never viewed this this video before. When I pulled it up, I did not have any watch history on this, so I have not seen this in at least. That means I have not seen this in at least 2 years. That's when I made this account. Or no, actually, I'm sorry. This is one of my newer accounts. This one's only been up for like 6 months, but I didn't watch this in preparation or anything. It always stuck with me because of just A, how insane the story is, and B, just because I'm a history nerd and love to learn about this stuff anyway. But that's insane that I was right on the money. I was not thinking I was going to get that close.
there was little evidence of the various atrocities Urban invoked in his speech to incite Europe to crusade. In fact, the Church had never seemed very concerned about the occupation before now, and pilgrimages to the Holy Land had continued practically uninterrupted since Jerusalem fell into Muslim hands in 637. So what was really going on? Well, earlier—
Politics. Probably money. Definitely politics, though. I don't actually remember the exact reasons, but probably politics, and there's probably some money involved somewhere.
that year, Alexius Comnenus, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, an empire that had fallen a long way since the days of Justinian, had sent envoys to the Pope asking for help from—
The days of Justinian? Screw that. I mean, what this map here isn't even the days of Justinian. This is
to Muslim hands in 637. So what was really— Well, earlier that year, Alexius Comnenus, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, an empire that—
This is Rome. This is Rome at its height. This is Julius, not Julian. This is Julius Caesar, not Julian. Because or whatever he said. Justinian, I'm sorry. I think Julian was Justinian's father, if I remember correctly. But Justinian actually managed to retake, so I'll use my mouse because I can't really point properly. So, this whole section fell when Rome, fell. Like, the great fall of Rome that you think of with the barbarians, aka the Germanics peoples, breaking down the walls and charging over the gates and whatever. But, they had already lost, by that point, I want to say all their territories in Spain. I think they had already lost Egypt at that point. They might have still had some of the African coast over here where old Carthage used to be. Which Carthage is an interesting subject too, and we may cover that in the I think these guys made a video on Carthage, or somebody did. There's a video on Carthage out there that's really good about the Carthage and Roman wars. But that aside, Rome was already in a decline by the time the fall of Rome happened. And when the fall of Rome happened, all they really lost was this section here going left. So they still had all of this. They still had all of this. And I want to say they still had some of this for a while and then lost it later. And by the time Justinian became the emperor, I think they had actually lost about half of this up here, maybe a little less than half, and they'd been pushed back up here as well. But Justinian managed to reclaim all of this section over here, a little bit of this, and I want to say he even made it back to around like here. Like I want to say he actually made it almost back to Italy. Justinian was a great emperor at the time. He managed to take what was really a dying empire and managed to put it back on the right track for a little while. But basically, as soon as he died, everything he'd set up and worked so hard to achieve just fell apart. And then they got to the point where it was just this little section over here and, a little bit of this.
It had fallen a long way since the day.
Yeah. Yeah, because Justinian had reclaimed all of this, pretty much. Maybe a little bit shy of where the border was in Rome's prime, but he'd recovered most of this. This gap right here, you can't really see it. Hold up, I'll move my camera. We'll move over here for now. This section right here, he'd recovered, maybe all but a sliver of it. And he had also retaken, like I said, up to here. But then they started losing little chunks. They lost this little chunk to the Germanics again. I don't remember how they lost this little chunk. Maybe they never regained it. Maybe they only regained up to here. But they did gain some of their northern territory back. I remember that. And they had recovered all of this pretty much. But then they immediately started getting pushed back, basically as soon as Julian. Not Julian. I just had his name. But as soon as the dude died, Justinian. As soon as Justinian died, all the regains they'd made and all the, strong signs that maybe the empire wasn't quite folding yet, it was gone. They lost everything again. And this first crusade is pretty much their last-ditch effort to try to put the Roman Empire back into something resembling the Roman Empire again.
Of Justinian had sent envoys to the Pope asking for help from the West against the Seljuk Turks. These Turkish Muslims coming out of the East had practically pushed the empire to its limits, forcing them out of nearly all of Anatolia, the traditional heartland of his empire.
Over the course of about 100 years. 200 years. This wasn't just all in this dude's lifetime. Like I said, they'd been, since the days of Justinian, they were pushing nonstop. I want to say there's a 200-year gap between when that started happening, because they lost some border towns originally, and they just kept getting pushed back.
Alexius Komnenos had hoped for supplies,
losing piece by piece,
arms, and a few thousand well-trained men so that Byzantium could continue to serve as the bulwark of Christian Europe against the Muslim East. Or really so he could just win this war, retake his territory, and strengthen the empire he was the head of. But, it's all in how you sell it. Well, Pope Urban had a slightly different idea. You see, the Pope wasn't in the most secure position. The Church was basically at war with the Holy Roman Emperor. Another Pope named Clement III had been installed in Ravenna, and claimed to be the rightful Pope. In fact, Urban couldn't even enter Rome, hence why he was kicking around in France, because the Holy Roman Emperor and the Antipope held it against him. So Urban thought, maybe let's unite all of Christendom to fight somebody else. Of course, he never really...
Such an interesting term with weird connotations, but we won't get into that because I don't know enough about it.
Christendom to fight somebody else. Of course, he never really asked for Alexius Komnenos' opinion on this plan, but we'll deal with that more later. And thus, the first...
Yeah, we'll just, oh, you want help? Sure, I'll just use this as an excuse to send everybody to war. Wait, no, what? We weren't prepared for everybody. Ah, well, you get everybody. Congratulations, you've got your reinforcements. Maybe a little too many, as we're about to discuss, but...
First Crusade began. But Urban was a smart guy. He knew how to motivate people. He knew how to gather a force larger and more cohesive than any nation in Europe could muster. He would offer to those who had spent their life fighting, those who had spent their lives committing mortal sins, one chance, one opportunity for absolution. And he would offer that opportunity for doing the thing they did best, going to war.
That was actually while there's all these questions about the authenticity of a pope offering, amnesty essentially to the gates of heaven for going to war, like that's obviously not a great thing. But what's interesting to me is that it was a politically it was a very, very clever move, because I mean, you how else, like, because think about it, he didn't have the money to pay them all, like the outrageous amounts mercenaries would cost. So instead of any sort of physical payment, he just said, "Hey, you'll get into heaven if you fight this war for me." And because the Europeans were such a deeply religious people, they went for it. They were like, "I yeah, bet I'll put my life on the line for that." But it's just it's an interesting thought process that led him to even come up with that. But I think politically it was a genius move. Moral implications aside, politically it was a genius move.
This is the first time a pope had ever done this. Never before had a plenary indulgence been offered for martial action, and this innovation drew a lot of people. And truth is, though I may have my suspicions about some of the motivations of the leaders of this movement, in a world as motivated by faith as medieval Europe, I think that faith and a hope for absolution was the reason that so many people bankrupted themselves just so they could join the crusade. But, unfortunately, this offer was so good that a lot of people who signed up weren't quite the people the Pope meant to get. You see, the Pope had set a date of August 1096 for the Crusaders to leave from Europe, so that knights and barons could get their affairs in order, and so that they could prepare what, in the Middle Ages, counted as supply and logistics. But that wasn't fast enough for some people. In France, there was a fellow by the
And this is where the trouble starts.
name of Peter the Hermit, who began whipping up the peasantry. He talked of the atrocities he'd witnessed in the Holy Land, although there's a fair amount of evidence to say that he never actually went there. And he told tales of his divine appointment by Christ to lead the spiritually pure who would be protected by heaven to Jerusalem. Tens of thousands of people left their farms to join Peter.
Poor guy. Poor guy. He just wanted to farm.
Although they had no money for the journey and didn't even know how far it was from their homes in Western Europe to the Levant. Few of them were soldiers, and fewer still even owned weapons. But as Peter preached, word of this peasant crusade began. And while Peter was still gathering his tide of peasants at Cologne, other groups decided that they were just going to set out on their own. And this is where the People's Crusade becomes one of the most unmitigated messes in the history of history. First, there's the group from France, under a fellow named Walter Sannevoix.
At least one of these groups, and I don't remember which, started just committing atrocities in their own, in Europe. I'm pretty sure he talks about it here in a second. I don't remember which group it was, though. I don't think it was Peter's group. I think it was either this guy or the next guy he's going to introduce.
They left ahead of Peter and made it through Hungary all right, but when they showed up at Belgrade, the doorstep of the Byzantine Empire, the local governor was very confused. He'd been told that the Crusaders weren't supposed to
maybe it wasn't these guys.
Show up for another half a year at least. And weren't they supposed to be soldiers? This was just a mob led by a few impoverished knights. So, he didn't let them in. He told them he was going to send a letter back to Constantinople, and could they please just wait patiently until he got his instructions in order? How did they respond? By pillaging the countryside. In all fairness to the Crusaders, they were probably starving. They hadn't thought to bring many supplies with them, and you've got to remember, this is spring in medieval Europe. It's not like they had refrigeration and rapid transport. The bulk of the food for the year comes in during the fall harvest, which is exactly why Urban scheduled his crusade to start.
I'm gonna have to eat after this video. I didn't even think about it until I saw that taco stand, and I was like, oh, I could go for a burrito right now.
In the middle of August, so it could be easy to resupply as they went. But by springtime,
I'll probably settle for a quesadilla, but it is what it is. Sorry. Minor tangent. Back to it.
Crusade to start in the middle of August, so it could be easy to resupply as they went. But by springtime, there's just not very much food around, so it's unlikely the Crusaders had been able to really stock up on spare provisions on their trek through Hungary. So the Crusaders went on a pillaging spree.
Which would have been fairly effective, because the spring harvest, while not as big as the fall harvest, would have been right around this time. So they probably really did manage to get the supplies from the locals, completely screwing up the local economy, maybe causing a famine in the process. I don't think any of this is going to be talked about here, but I can just imagine the local damage created by a bunch of starving peasants who are just nowhere close to home, just raiding and pillaging and basically stealing their entire spring harvest from them. That food that was supposed to get them through the spring and summer, just gone. I can't. I mean, I can barely imagine how much, like, the scale of that damage. I can imagine what kind of damage it would cause, but just the scale of it is insane to think about, because that's an entire. I mean, that's an entire quarter of the Mediterranean right there. Just, I mean, not. I mean, quarter of the Mediterranean. Maybe less than that, but it's still a large amount of land. That's bigger than most U.S. states. And that entire population, I mean, even though the population levels were lower at that time, it's still a lot of damage for sure.
Destroyed homes and farms. They even came to blows with the local Byzantine garrison. Some of them even went back to Hungary, which they'd managed to cross through before without doing any harm, and tried to loot a local market. They tried, but the townsfolk kicked them out, and the local Byzantine garrison beat them down too. And soon, cowed, these first crusaders were brought under escort to Constantinople. We'll catch up with them in a bit when Peter gets there. But first we should talk about the second splinter group of the People's Crusade. A group from Germany.
Maybe this is the ones I was thinking about committing the atrocities before. Maybe it's not. Maybe that was a different video I watched. Like I said, it's been years since I've seen this, so I don't remember. But one of these splinter groups. You know what? I'll cover it myself if he doesn't cover it here. If this isn't the group that did that, or if he doesn't cover them right after them, well, there's not a lot of time left in this video. He might talk about it. If they don't cover it, I'll cover it towards the end.
Led by Count Emicho of Leiningen. This count had heard of Peter's preachings and had gathered his own group to go crusade. They were to head off to the Holy Land from Germany, but, well, they only got a few miles before they seemed to decide that, you know, the local Jews are a lot closer and less well armed. And so they went...
Yeah. He's See, that's the funny thing, is they're just attacking Jews. That's not even who they were... Man, No, I said this in a previous video, but it was one of the ones that got, had audio issues, and I never got to upload. The Jews cannot catch a break in all of history. And this is just one of the examples. That's gonna be, I mean, if we end up doing more history-related stuff, you're gonna see the Jews cannot catch a break. They weren't even the targets this time. It was supposed to be the Muslims, but I mean, Western Europeans at the time didn't really care about the difference. I don't know if they knew the difference or not, but they definitely didn't care.
Went from town to town through Germany, sacking their own cities, slaughtering the Jewish population, and stealing any money they might find. Now this was opposed almost unilaterally by the Catholic Church. This wasn't at all what Urban had called for. Even if you argue he didn't care about Jews, there's no question he wanted the fighting out of Christendom at the very least. Not only did priests and monks preach against this sort of violence, but there are actually heroic stories of bishops opposing these marauding crusaders and trying to protect their local...
I didn't remember the names, but I was gonna talk about one of these incidents. I think he's about to bring it up. If he hadn't covered it, I was about to cover one of these incidents. But yeah, I think he's going to
Jewish communities. The Bishop of Speyer gave them his protection. The Bishop of Worms brought the local Jews to take refuge in his home and even tried to fortify the place. But the Christian Crusaders attacked and stormed the bishop's house, slaughtering some 800 Jews hiding there. The Bishop of Mainz did the same, and even ordered the town barred against the Crusaders. In fact, there, the local Jewish population even raised a great deal of gold to give Emicho if he would just go away. But Emicho took the bribe, and then attacked the city anyway. When word of the attack reached him, the bishop raised his personal guard and rushed to join forces with the governor's militia and a force of local burgesses, who had come out armed to defend the local Jewish population. After fierce fighting, the locals drove the Crusaders off, but the Crusaders gathered more men, recruited some sympathetic or bribable townsfolk, and attacked again. This time, the defenders broke and fled. In the aftermath, thousands of Jews were slaughtered. Emicho's band massacred their way through Germany until at last, they ended up at the Hungarian border. By this time, Peter and his crusade had already passed through Hungary. We'll talk about how their trip went next time. But when the King of Hungary saw Emicho's marauding band, he decided that nope, he was having none of this, and refused to let them into his country. The Crusaders decided to force their way in anyway, and promptly laid siege to the Hungarian Christian city of Moson, where they...
I was about to say, forget the fact that they were attacking the wrong enemy. I don't know how they thought this was gonna like. They'd been attacking villages and small towns before this, but a royal capital of a large kingdom is not the same thing. It's just really not. Yeah, you and a dozen buddies might be able to cut your way through a village or two. Maybe you and 100 buddies or 200 buddies can even get through a small town. But you're not gonna be able to just seize a city like that with a ragtag group of essentially peasants. I mean, a few of them might have been had some soldier training, maybe a proper weapon or two, but I mean, these were not professional soldiers, and they stood no chance.
They were promptly defeated by the city garrison and slaughtered almost to a man.
Yep.
And thus, the First Crusade began. Join us next time to find out what happens to Peter's band of itinerant peasants, find out what the Pope and the nobles were doing all this time, and watch the First Crusade begin in earnest.
Yep. Yep. So that is the start of one of the most chaotic stories in all of history, and we will continue to cover it next time. I don't think I have anything else to add to that I didn't add throughout the thing. I would have stopped here to talk about the atrocities if they hadn't been covered, but it was this video. It was covered. So, but yeah, I mean, it's not that anybody was okay with this going on. It's just that it was seen as an excuse. So, which really didn't help the image of the Crusaders at all. I mean, I think we'll see later in this series, by the time the actual Crusaders show up, so much nonsense has already happened that nobody's even sure if they want to even let this happen anymore. Like, it gets really bad. It is an absolute... It's absolute chaos. Which actually ends up helping them at one point. Funnily enough, how chaotic and unmitigated this is will help the First Crusade at one point in this story, and at every other point it will screw them. But we will cover more about that next time. Thank you for watching. I'm gonna go eat something now before recording another video. Appreciate y'all for stopping by. Let me know if y'all want to see more content like this. I am totally into making more content like this. And in the meantime, peace.